Hi everybody, this is Rose of Sharon. I've got a new book review. It's called Shobun, Forgotten War Crime in the Pacific. It's by Michael J. Goodwin. This was written in 95. It's very, very short, but it's about a crime that I didn't even know about, and I've been studying World War II for years, and I mean years, and I've done the losing side of the war, which would be Italy, Russia, and Japan, and I'm obsessed, as a lot of people know. And Luca, if you're watching, pick this up. Well, I know it's not about Italy. You're all about Italy because that's your country. But this talks about the 11 young men who actually went to the Pacific Theater and how they were captured. And spoiler alert, they were actually taken in and slaughtered. They were beheaded and beaten. Well, they were beaten. Some of them were beaten, and then, I mean, they were treated terribly by the Japanese. It was just a horrendous, egregious crime. And I hate saying that because I love the Japanese so much, and it's very difficult for me to talk about this because I feel divided being a Japanophile. But it was just like for the propaganda that they had with Axis Sally in Germany, and Marcel Duce in Italy. That was the way that they boosted morale, other than Tokyo Rose. Of course, when Tokyo Rose was tried, and we all know that. We know what happened. We know what happened to Hirohito, and we know what happened to all these different people. History reveals itself, but it just talks about how these poor men, they were going in to fight the Japanese, and well, some of them were from Australia even. They came from Perth, and they were brutally executed, and it was horrible. And then it talks about these airplanes called the Black Cats and why they were called the Black Cats. And I didn't know this. This is fascinating to me. But the Black Cats were so named because they were painted black to blend in with the night. And they actually saved more lives than they took during the war, which is a miracle in and of itself. And they rescued the POWs. But it speaks of the trial itself, and they were very forthcoming. There were some that was actually one man that will never be able to be brought to justice, and the dental records, they weren't really conclusive enough based on they were buried in they were just buried in a shallow grave and left to rot, basically, even after 45 when we won the, well, granted, the war really didn't end then, if you know, like I do. The war actually continued on into the Cold War. If we want to be completely honest, it continued on until the 80s after the Berlin Wall came down. That's just my thought. And some people even think that World War II is still going on. There might be some truth to that too. I'm willing to go out on a limb and say that World War II really didn't end, and it might just go into World War III. Hopefully I'm wrong on that front. But I don't know why, but I always feel like when I make predictions like that, they come true, and I have to be very careful. But I'm not a prophetess by any means, but when it comes to history never lies, and I just feel like we're in for a repeat here with the way things are going. But hopefully I'm wrong, and you can dismiss my claim and my foresight. But talks about the trial of Ensign Chiuma, and it was the man who beheaded Bill Goodwin. He was the last to stand trial. Gosh, it was just, terrible. But I just could not put this book down, despite the fact this was so tragic. And of course, the parents too. After everything, after the aftermath of this absolutely abysmal, abominable act that was done by the Japanese. And of course, they had their own protocol and their own procedures, but they did not follow them. Even though they said they did, under Geneva Convention, by the way. So, yeah, it's so hard to read this, being such a fan. And, of course, the writer, he mentions that only recently, and this is more current, but I'll go ahead and read the final paragraph here. It's actually more than a paragraph. It's half of a page or 3/4 of a page. Only recently has the government of Japan started to talk openly about the country's behavior in the war, and not without controversy. Well, yeah. In August 93, Morihiro Hosokawa took office as prime minister, and one of his first acts was to publicly express profound remorse and apologies for the fact that Japan's action, including acts of aggression and colonial rule, caused unbearable suffering and sorrow for so many people. That's an understatement. This open apology sparked harsh responses from other high government officials. Some members of Japan's House of Representatives called Hosokawa's apology a blasphemy against history and demanded that he retract the statement. One member of the House, Shintaro Ishihara, went so far as to say, "Those indiscreet remarks without solid historical viewpoints deserve death." Well, that's a little bit harsh. Many people in Japan still refuse to face the truth, or even worse, think Japan did nothing wrong during the war. Yeah, there's still those teetotalers that they're gung-ho and they just think, oh no, we'll live and die for the rising sun, and yet they still live under that whole honor code. Well, yeah, the Bushido thing, I don't know if there are people who still live by Bushido, but I think that there are those who still do, even though it's kind of archaic. It went out a long time ago, but it survived quite a long time. The people of Japan would find that they would get along much better with the rest of the world if they could face the fact that they and their leadership were the source of a great deal of suffering during the first half of the century. Yeah, unfortunately, I would have to agree with that. But nowadays, we're allies with the Japanese, so I think if they were forthcoming about their offenses, then it would be easier, because some people like Michael are never going to forget, and the people who lost loved ones, and they had support groups. Like I said, I actually didn't mention that. I got off track. I'm sorry. They had support groups, and they were able to overcome all of this. But if you're like me and you love World War II and you want to know more about Japan and you didn't know anything about this particular tragedy, and Shobun actually itself was, they thought it meant just execute, but it was deliver the prisoners, deal with the prisoner, punish the prisoner. Actually, no, it was punish. Originally, it was punish the prisoners or execute. Some of them said, oh, it's just execute them. And it was all for morale for the empire, of course, or the emperor at the time. Hail Japan, but glory to the rising sun. But it was rough. It really was rough to read. But I'm glad I read it. I'm glad I learned something. I have another book called 1941 about Japan. I'm going to read that one fairly soon. But Shobun was easy for me to get through because it was very short. It was about 100 pages long. So it was rife with information I had no idea about. So until next time, live long and prosper. Ciao, Tootsie.